Nonprofit leaders, I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode.
I want to talk about when we think about planning our budgets and how we lay out budgets and those kinds of things. So the first thing I want to talk about is we tend in our budgets to lump all the expenses together, right? We have income usually at the top, and then we have expenses is usually the next section, and then there's the bottom line. And I find this layout rather unhelpful. So, and here's why. Because some expenses I call that our revenue generating expenses. So when we spend money on a development director, their direct job is to bring in money. So that is a revenue generating expense. Now, if we don't have enough money, well, let me go in the other two categories. There's impact generating expenses, and some expenses generate impact and revenue. I really love those expenses. I love spending on things that do both. I love spending on things that bring in more money, right? More money than they cost. And then their third category, I call them like flushing it down the toilet expenses or just necessary expenses. And these are things that don't really have a direct benefit. Licensing fees, they have like, yes, presumably having everybody be licensed if you need to be licensed in something, keep standards high. Taxes, payroll taxes, you may have to pay. Ultimately, hopefully we all benefit from taxes, but they don't benefit your organization necessarily directly. So those are just expenses you have to have, you're required to have them, but they're not really bringing return on impact, financial revenue generating expense. And when I build a budget, I like to do a few things, which I'm going to tell you in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about what happens when we're in an organization that doesn't seem to have enough money, right? Either we don't see enough money in the bank account, or we see that bottom line turning red or negative. So many times we go to cutting, right? We're like, we don't have enough income, so we're going to cut our expenses. Now, what happens if you don't have your revenue generating expenses pulled out and labeled? Well, they're likely to get cut. And I saw this happen early in the pandemic. All businesses were freaking out. Nonprofits were freaking out. They're like, the world's ending. And I remember one of the first mass emails I sent out to my list. And I think my email list had a lot of development directors. And I got all these autoresponders back, dozens of them. That person was no longer with the organization. There was like mass firing of development directors. And my heart sank, because when you cut a revenue generating expense, you are cutting your revenue. You are not saving money. You are losing more money. Unless, of course, that revenue generating expense wasn't really generating revenue. But that's another story, right? We need to check that. We might need to shift our spending to something that generates revenue even better. So when I build a budget, I like to have direct program income and expenses at the top. That's the top section. So I have, and what is program revenue? Fees that people pay to enter the program. Program revenue is restricted grants. So if you didn't have the program, you wouldn't have the revenue. That's how I define program revenue. Direct program expenses, that program staff, things that, if you didn't have the program, you wouldn't have the expense. And I like to see, what that is costing, right? Often that's a negative number in a nonprofit. If you can make it zero, that's great. Sometimes it's a positive number. There's no judgment here about how much our programs cost or bring in at the end of the day, but we do need to know. Then the next section I like to have are what used to be called overhead, and I don't like to call them overhead. I like to call them operations, because operations sound like you need them, right? If you don't have operations, you don't operate. And that's where we have things that, even if you didn't have, like if you have multiple programs and you got rid of one program, you'd still have that expense, right? So you probably still have an executive director, right? And the part of their job, now, if you have an executive director who also runs a program, you can split their salary up. But there are things that make the whole thing run, the work of strategic planning, the work of figuring out which programs you should be running, right? Financial planning across the organization. These are all operations expenses. Then the next section is where I put my revenue generating expenses. This is usually the development department, the fundraising. So I put the salaries of the fundraising staff or development staff in there. I put marketing expenses related to fundraising in there, because we can also have marketing related to hiring staff and marketing related to filling our programs. So marketing type expenses related to bringing in revenue and those kinds of things. And then we can have a bottom line if we want to make sure it's all balancing out. I also, because I want people to love their budgets, I like to use emojis. I put a heart emoji next to any impact generating expense. I put a little money bag emoji next to the revenue generating expenses. And I actually put a little toilet emoji next to those necessary expenses that we can't really cut. We have to have them. Now, let's go back to that scenario where you don't have enough money. If you call your revenue generating expenses, and you have little money bags next to them, they are much less likely to be cut when somebody gets worried that you are overspending. And the mindset shift I really want folks to have is, if you don't have enough money, especially because we're nonprofits, right? We're doing something important. We're doing something good in the world. What I want you to do instead is think, we need more money. How do we get more money? We put more money into our money-making machine, right? We spend more or better on our revenue-generating expenses. The only time to cut expenses is if we have expenses we don't need or that aren't generating good financial impact or mission impact, or if we have to temporarily to deal with a cash flow crisis. But cutting expenses otherwise is never going to solve the problem of not having enough money. Only investing more or better in revenue generating expenses solves the problem of not having enough money.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.